Welcome to another episode of Israel at War. I'm Phyllis Zimbler-Miller, and today I'm very pleased to have as a returning guest Dr. Michael Berenbaum, who's the director of the Sig Zering Institute and a professor of Jewish Studies at the AJU, American Jewish University in Los Angeles. And this time he's just returned from a week in Israel. So this is a boots on the ground report, and I'm very excited. Michael, take it away.
Okay, first of all, Phyllis, thank you very much for having me. Let's begin with a couple of contradictions. Those of you who've heard the podcast before understand that I've said the strength of Israel is its weakness and the weakness of Israel is its strength. That becomes crystal clear from the news, by which I mean that Israel has overwhelming force, and it can't, when it uses overwhelming force, it ends up being weakened in the court of public opinion, because there are two wars. There's an actual war on the ground, and the other war is the war for public opinion, which is going to enable Israel to continue. The second is the weakness of Israel is its strength, and that is Israel has a total conflict of goals. And the two goals are the restoration of the deterrent factor and the systematic dismantling of the military capacity of Hamas to attack Israel from Gaza. And the second goal is the return of the hostages. They are in conflict. We see the conflict explicitly. And what is Israel's weakness? Israel's weakness is its greatness, which is it values the lives of each of its citizens. And we have to say that the hostages, that the hostage families did a very important job in putting the hostages front and center in the questions of the Israeli public, in the concerns of the Israeli public. And there is genuine joy when the hostages are returned, most especially that now it's children and women and old people, old women and family reunification. There's genuine joy. The entire country looks on it on television. They hold their breath. They move up and down in terms of their spirit by whether these people are returned. But that is in conflict with the restoring and the moving of the war effort to dismantle Hamas. So you have to understand that when you're in Israel, you live with that tension. Piece of bad news, very bad news. In one sense, Hamas has already achieved two very significant victories. Number one, it murdered approximately 1,200 Israelis. The second is it's already shrunk the boundaries of the state of Israel. And that is, if you go up north, you cannot go up north. Kiryat Shmona, which is a city of some 20,000, the kibbutzim around there, Metula and the like, are all devoid of population, who have been filling up the hotels of Israel in Tel Aviv and Eilat and the Dead Sea. Everywhere there's a hotel. We were at the Fuchsberg Center for Conservative Judaism. They were having the families of an Air Force base that from Gaza, from the Gaza area, that had been whose families had been moved from the Air Force base. So neither in the north nor in the south do you have the complete state of Israel. And it's clear that these people will not return to their homes until the deterrent factor is restored, until they have confidence in the government and confidence that the government is there and Sahel is there to protect them. And there is no such confidence at this moment. A couple of pieces of, relatively speaking, good news. Number one, despite the visuals of the massive bombardment, Israel is proceeding slowly and cautiously with a minimization of its own casualties to the IDF to dismantle Hamas in the north. It believes it has succeeded significantly in dismantling Hamas in the north. that have moved the population to the south, and that will pose a problem when the ceasefire is done, because the problem with the end of the ceasefire means that the war will resume, and they will have to do something in terms of the south. And whether they can do that by bombardment, or they have to do it with special forces and with in and out and special units, that is something that the military will determine. And it's
Michael, I just want to clarify to our audience, you're talking about the south of Gaza. We just went from the south of Israel. I'm not laughing, but I'm to the south of Gaza, correct?
has essentially assumed control of northern Gaza, and it has moved the population to southern Gaza. Let's disregard for a moment the fringe factors in Israel. By the way, fringe factors that may also be represented in the government who have spoken and misspoken, misspoken terribly of restoring some settlements in Gaza, of the Nakba again, of ethnic cleansing and the like. That's not going to happen. And we have to remember that Israel withdrew from Gaza in 2005, has no intention of coming back into Gaza with settlements, but Israel has to begin to think of what the day after is going to be. An insight from my experience in Israel this year, this period of time, is that Israel will face a very particular problem, because the day after the United States cannot be solely an honest broker its influence is limited, and the Arab states are going to have to step up in order to figure out what to do with Gaza in the aftermath. President Biden is a hero in Israel. There are posters up all over the place. Thanks. They regard his leadership as incredible. They are deeply moved the fact that he came during the war. He has hugged Bibi Netanyahu intensely, and that is going to come with a certain restraint. And he's trying his utmost to restrain Israel in one very basic way. There's a problem in Gaza. There's a problem in Syria. There's a problem with Hezbollah attacks on Israel in the north. And what President Biden is trying to do is to constrain those in the Israeli cabinet who want to heat up the West Bank at this point, and consequently give Israel, as it were, a fourth front to be concerned about. And he has set some red lines for the cabinet, and the performance of both Secretary of State Blinken and William Burns, who's the director of the CIA. And we should point out that William Burns, who is known as the director of the CIA and the former ambassador, U.S. ambassador in Moscow, spent many formative years in the Arab world and speaks Arabic fluently. And he has been in the region almost consistently, negotiating the arrangements with Qatar that have led to the ceasefire, to the cessation of the pause and the cessation. It's not a ceasefire, and consequently, his role has been indispensable. So I come away with that. Israel feels it emotionally. I met with a friend of mine that I've been working with for a while, whose mother was a very important figure in the resistance in Poland during the Holocaust. She was a courier, and she had a very interesting story because she was arrested while pretending to be a Pole, and was a Jewish woman in Auschwitz who was labeled in Auschwitz as a Pole, and even listed shown on the walls of the display of Auschwitz as a Pole, but she was actually a Jewess being there, which is a very unique experience. And his daughter's fiance was murdered on the second day in combat. And we spent a 2-hour meeting. The first hour was listening to a man cry who is now bereft of his future son-in-law, a young man who had been part of his life for a very long time. So everybody knows somebody who has been either captured, wounded, or killed in the process, and Israel is deeply bereft of what's happening. And yet life continues. Life continues, but it continues in a disruptive manner. My sister-in-law, my niece, who is a research scientist and has a startup, half of her staff is, and is relatively speaking, young person, half of her staff is called up, and consequently they can't hold meetings. The business life is quiet. We were thanked for coming, which is almost an embarrassment. And when we purchased in the stores, they thanked us again and again and again, because business is down and the economy, which normally is bustling and the like, is ground to a standstill. And that means that Israel cannot sustain the call-up of 300,000 people indefinitely on reserve duty. And you feel it in the lack of crowds, in the limitation of traffic, in an airport that is empty because only El Al and El Al subsidiary Arkia flying into Israel. Ironically, a couple of Arab states are continuing to fly into Israel, but all the major American carriers have stopped. Lufthansa has stopped, and the like. So you get the atmosphere of war. You also have one other tremendous factor, which is that Israel does not trust that if the prime minister is faced with a choice between his own good or the national good, that he will singularly choose the national good. And that is a deeply disturbing and troubling aspect of the political system. They do not feel that they can be rid of the prime minister, have the transition that is required by normal politics during this period of time when Israel is at war. But Bibi Netanyahu is restrained in the war cabinet by the presence of Gallant, who is his Secretary of Defense, whom he tried to dismiss, and also by Gantz, who is a former chief of staff and is certainly widely respected, Benny Gantz, who went into the cabinet precisely to have this outsized influence, figuring that a government of national unity is essential if Israel is going to conduct a war. So Bibi can be outvoted 2-1. There are two other observers in it. One of them is Ron Dermer, former Israeli ambassador to the United States. And Dermer, I think, is most concerned about the world the day after, because he has absolutely no military experience, never wore the uniform, and is not a military man. And then the former chief of staff, Eisenkot, who has a very important role to play. Both he and Dermer are advisory and the like. One final point, and then I'll take some questions from you, Phyllis. I don't know, because I was not in the United States during this period of time. Israel, from left to right, is convinced of the accuracy of the military assessment that there were tunnels and headquarters under the major hospitals and under mosques and schools, which, by the way, is a war crime. But they are convinced that there is ample evidence of that. I'm not sure how that plays out in world opinion, because I've been gone for a period of time, but everybody I met all the way through believes there's ample evidence and that Israel was justified in those attacks, and justified, for example, and showing that hostages were in the hospital, and people were kept underground in these tunnels. The tunnel formations are larger and more significant than Israel thought they were, and consequently they will have work to do, even as they control this territory, to dismantle and to destroy, and to make sure that the tunnel universe doesn't continue to exist. I don't have anything unique to report on the hostage situation, except to reiterate that there's a contradiction between fighting the war and getting the hostages. And I've always been intrigued. There was a major decision made by David Ben-Gurion in 1939, when Great Britain restricted Jewish immigration to Palestine. And I use Palestine as a historian because that's what the territory was called at that point.
Yes, by the British. British mandated Palestine.
By the British mandate, and the British restricted Jewish immigration to 15,000 a year for 5 years. And Ben-Gurion walked a very interesting line. He said, "We shall fight with the British against the Nazis as if there was no white paper, and we shall fight the British against the white paper as if there was no Nazi Germany." And I get the sense that you have to say the two things at the same time, the contradiction and the conflict with regard to the hostages. So let me take your questions, because I've given a reasonably full report on my experience.
Let's go to the tunnels for a minute. Of course, people who don't want to believe anything don't want to believe about the tunnels. But I think, again, Israel's in a bind. I was watching Israel 24 News this morning, and a daughter of a returned hostage was being interviewed, and as many years ago, I had a security clearance, so I absolutely, American security clearance, absolutely understand it. She was only allowed to say certain things on the air. And again, in the Wall Street Journal today, it said that the Israeli government has asked released hostages not to talk about it. So you have a problem that you have absolute eyewitnesses to what it was like. But for reasons that I can understand, Israel has asked that these released hostages not report. So again, it's a double-edged.
Phyllis, let's look at that for one other thing. Israel has a double-edged responsibility with regard to the hostages who are released. On the one hand, they must handle them with kid gloves in order to facilitate their ultimate return to normal life with the maximum and minimal damage that can be done from the experience of 53 days in captivity. On the other hand, they must also debrief them with regard to intelligence and get vital information as to what happened. And obviously, they're not doing that with young children who are being treated with the highest measure of concern and care for them. The hospital has been transformed into what looks like a hotel. There are playthings and teddy bears and all of that to facilitate their return. So it's clear that Israel has to conduct itself in such a way that it preserves the information it has from debriefing, which will be vital in the future, because they have been in the tunnels, they have seen the fighters, they understand what is happening. And I always recall that, I guess you're young enough to also recall it, Phyllis, that when you had the raid on Entebbe in July 4th, 1976, America's 200th anniversary, ironically, you had the raid of Entebbe, but before that, the non-Jewish hostages had been released and they came to France. And it's clear that Israel intelligence services debriefed them completely in order to understand what they knew and consequently to plan what ultimately became the raid on Entebbe. So I have full confidence that Israeli intelligence services are debriefing these people in such a way as to get maximum information, and they're not concerned as much
unknown caller
they're not concerned as much with the war effort as with the information war effort as perhaps we are in the diaspora.
Let's go back to that Entebbe. I remember exactly where I was because I was in the city of Philadelphia, coming across the bridge from a kosher pizza restaurant in New Jersey back to Philly when we heard the news. But there's one difference there that I think about. All the hostages, except one person, as I recall, who had been taken to a hospital and she was never rescued, were in the same place.
Dina Block was the one hostage who was not in that. She had been taken to a hospital and the like. No. We can't compare the
I'm
job.
just saying, so information about when they're all together as opposed to different, not just Hamas, but different terrorist groups have different people. So it just makes exponentially harder. So I just wanted to say that one major difference.
Let's also remind ourselves, and there's a very important thinking about this with regard to the press. Israel's actually involved in 3 wars. This may be the first Israel-Iran war directly, because remember, Iran is putting pressure on Israel with its surrogates, Hezbollah in the north, the Hamas in Gaza, and also it's harassing Israeli shipping in the Red Sea, which ironically was a precipitating cause of the 1967 war. And it's also attacking, sort of biting at the ankles of American forces. And this is what makes it important that the Biden administration has done a couple things that are terribly important. Number one, we have 2 aircraft carriers in the region who are fending off. We've been intercepting drones. We Americans have been intercepting drones that are geared. We also recaptured a ship that had been taken over by pirates in the Red Sea. And we are, in that sense, drawing lines and saying, until this, you can go, but no further. And that's been significant. The level of military and intelligence cooperation with the United States has been outstanding, and it has been there from the very beginning. I also want our audience to pay attention to one other extraordinary factor, and let them draw their own political conclusions as to that. Notice one thing that is different about this war than the 1973 war, which is very important, and that is that there's been no oil crisis. The Arab states have not employed the oil weapon, and by the way, that has kept anti-Semitism, which is exploding, down, because we haven't gone up to $7, $8, $9 price for the barrel for gas, and we haven't also bled Europe dry with regard to its fuel supply, which is already compromised because it doesn't have Russian suppliers at this point. So it's extraordinarily important to understand that Hamas is opposed by all of the Sunni Arab countries, no matter what they say. They are not unhappy that Israel is inflicting damage on Hamas. The reality is that Hamas is aligned with Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt. Hamas, Jordan will feel insecure because of its large Palestinian population if Hamas emerges victorious. And even BDS cannot rest secure in Saudi Arabia with this. So pay attention, careful attention, to the fact that they haven't done the oil embargo. And we should also say that America itself is far better equipped to face an oil embargo now than ever before, because we are a net exporter of oil and we are self-sufficient in terms of oil, and we have reduced that capacity, the needs, by all of the means of the environmental changes that have taken place. Electric cars, mileage requirements on automobiles, efficiency, solar panels, all of that has left us in a far more protected situation from potential turmoil.
Let's, before we come to an end though today, talk about Hezbollah a little more. I just saw a headline before I got on by an Israeli saying, we need to start paying more attention. We can't pretend that they're just going to stay quiet. They're going to, I don't know if the word is pop up at some point. So what's your feeling about that?
My feeling is that they are essentially, let's say a couple things. Hezbollah is more linked to Lebanon and more concerned about everything that takes place in Lebanon, which is their home now, and in which they have significant political influence. So they have a lot more to lose than Hamas, which doesn't really give a damn about the Palestinian population that it controls. And consequently, it's not willing to provoke, at least at this moment. That could change in an hour, could change in a day,
yes, right.
could change in a week. It's not as willing to provoke. Now, we have to pay attention to one other factor, which is important. Hamas has unguided missiles. Hezbollah has guided missiles, and they can make the entire north of Israel uninhabitable, but they fully understand that that will not come for free, that there will be a significant cost involved in terms of what happens in Lebanon. And they're also very, very careful to agitate but not implicate. There are Israelis who feel that if you're really going at a military operation, then let's go, number one, let's go and get rid of Hamas, they would say, as a military functioning capacity, and also its rule over Gaza. And secondly, once we're at it, let's also inflict the damage on Hezbollah so that we end up in a situation of greater security. Now, we have to notice something else, and this is Israeli politics. Benjamin Netanyahu is under enormous pressure from segments of his own coalition and his own party, Likud, which is normally a hawkish party, because he's known for being cautious. But there have been multiple operations against Gaza and against Hamas in Gaza that have stopped short. And given the magnitude of the loss that we had on October 7th, and given Benjamin Netanyahu's concern for preserving his power, though I do not believe he will be able to preserve it over the long run, if he stops short, he will not only face opposition on the left, which wants to replace him now, but he'll face significant opposition on the right from the group that he's aligned with. And consequently, he's in an enormously uncomfortable position, including the fact that his normal instincts are ironically talking tough, but being quite cautious in terms of military operations.
I take it you don't think he's another Golda. You know, the way we both talked to having seen the movie Golda during the Yom Kippur War.
Well, let me put it to you this way. Nobody for a moment imagined that if faced with a choice for the good of her nation or the good of Golda Meir would think for a moment about what is good for her over the existential good of the nation.
Correct.
That even her greatest critics would concede that that's not possible. She got up in the morning, lived and breathed, and worked her entire life for the establishment and the maintenance of a Jewish state. She didn't give a bloody damn about her appearance or anything else. She clearly would not was not interested in the accoutrements of power. There were no cigars, no massive ice cream. Even in the film, you have her forcing borscht down Henry Kissinger's throat from her Russian cook. But people just don't have the confidence that in the same situation, Benjamin Netanyahu would not be angling for his own personal good. And they see it and this relates to the American experience in a certain way. They see that by the fact that he had made sure that many of the documents that would be used by a commission of inquiry came over to the prime minister's office. And it's only the attorney general who stopped him from controlling these documents and turning them back over to the state where they can be used after the war by a commission of inquiry. So he's angling in every way to preserve his power.
Let me just clarify. There was a commission of inquiry after the Yom Kippur War. Is that correct?
There was a commission of inquiry after the Yom Kippur War. There was a commission of inquiry after the events of Sabra and Shatila. And there ironically is a commission of inquiry after what happened in Merom, which is the stampede in Merom, but we do not have a report 2 years after what happened in Merom, and the population will not stand for that. Will not remember 2 years ago on Lag Bomer, you had a stampede that killed multitudes of people, and the idea that a commission has not yet reported, not yet learned the lessons, and the like, that's not going to happen. With regard, and Netanyahu is the only one of the leadership of Israel that has neither apologized nor accepted responsibility.
For now.
And the population is not going to forget that. And the families are not going to forget that it took him a very long time to meet with the hostage families. And the first time he met with them, you had representatives chosen by the families, and he brought in a stringer who essentially went against the message that had been agreed upon by the families. The stringer saying essentially, we have complete confidence in the government, do what you have to do, and we understand that you can't presume to protect the lives of the hostages. That was not the message the families had agreed upon. Ironically, they report that Joe Biden spent an enormous amount of time with them. He embraced them physically, and he showed what he characteristically shows, which is empathy for this situation. And Biden is the consoler in chief, and he's a man who experienced loss, and therefore he understands how to deal with loss. And he was very helpful to some of them as to how to deal with this. So contrast that with the lack of empathy that they got from their own prime minister, and you see a dramatically different picture.
As we end, we hope to have you on again, so it's not your last chance, but is there anything you want to end? Today is day 54. Is there anything you want to say?
I will say this, I came away believing that it's going to be long and it's going to be hard. And the other thing I came away believing is that those of us who had planned to go to Israel should go to Israel. We should visit, we should volunteer, we should show up, we should be there and be present. It's not easy because we had to go, ironically, to we were originally scheduled to fly directly from United. We had to go to Athens and then take another flight. We came back via Rome and took another flight as well. So it's not easy, but it really is important. And those of us who support Israel and support the Israeli people, if we have the opportunity to make our presence known and be there, it's very important. By the way, you have to take cautions. Everywhere you go, they tell you where the shelter is. And we, in fact, once had sirens on the highway. We had to pull over the side. I was, I don't know, brazen or less worried about it. But when we saw a mother putting her body over her 6-month-old baby, our heart broke. And we understood that mother was going to protect her kid, no matter what. And by the way, any number of Israelis are also saying that they're applying for gun permits, and that when they go into the safe house, they're not going to go into the safe house without the capacity to defend their people, to defend their families.
Could you clarify one thing before we end this? I always misunderstood that reservists took their guns home, but I since was corrected by someone you know, but we won't go into that only certain people are allowed to carry their guns who are reservists. So when you say this, could we clarify this a little for our audience, why you say people are applying for permits?
Well, you can, look, soldiers must take their guns.
On active duty.
Soldiers on active duty must have their guns with them. I mean, very interesting. We're in synagogue. The man who was reading the Torah had his gun on him. And again, you have to think of what it is that the Torah reader has his gun on him, his machine gun on him, and is reading the Torah. And you have to accept that as a normal part of what? Of everyday life. And other people are saying essentially they're applying for civilian weapons permits because they're not going to go in and be in a situation in which their protection is to hold the door closed. And again, that's an individual family's decision, certainly one that's comprehensible. Let me tell a little bit of a cute story. Okay. And maybe with this we'll conclude. A friend of mine was dealing with the improvements they want to make to the shelter in their building, and everybody voted to improve the bathroom of the shelter and also to improve the internet so that they could know what was happening outside, and they weren't in a bubble apart from the world. And then a third person said we should get television and cable into the shelter. And a person said, I object to that completely because the only time I'm away from television is when I'm in the shelter. It gives me a little bit of peace and quiet. And you have to imagine what peace and quiet is when you're being bombed and the like. Let me close with one other thing. Today is a very important day on the Jewish calendar. and that is it's the 29th of November. And on the 29th of November, 1947, is the date upon which the United Nations voted for the partition of Palestine into a Jewish and an Arab state. And if you think of it, we could now be in the 76th
76, yeah.
76th year of a Palestinian and a Jewish state in the land between the sea and between the river and the sea, if the Arabs had not rejected that proposal and chose violence. Those who say from the river to the sea are calling for the dismantlement of Israel. Those who are calling for a ceasefire are calling for the victory of pogromists, of rapists, of people who behead children and take women, children, the elderly captive. And I think that we have a problem with the immorality of those who presume that they're speaking for peace.
And with that, I will thank Michael, as usual, for his incredible insights. And I will ask our listeners, whatever you can do to help, it can be the smallest thing, or if you have a platform that you can help get across facts, like the fact that Israel left Gaza since 2005, whatever you can do, if you can go to Israel. And as we end now, before we said bring them home, now we say bring them all home.